like the plates of Mormon also just disappear. Of course they do. They have to disappear in order for the fraud to be propagated. So it's like, and that's what it looks like. And there's only 2 occasions in Scripture where this kind of thing is actually given, and there's much skepticism about it. And the first one is with Cyrus. The actual, that's the second one, Josiah's the first. But the important one is Cyrus, because Cyrus is predicted essentially a couple of hundred years before he appears on the scene. Okay? As being the one who will bring the people of Israel out of captivity. Okay? And it's the only time he's mentioned by name, Cyrus. Now, why do I think, I have to give you what I think on this particular one, rather than ask you what you think, because I've thought about it. I've thought about it. Why do I think this is a rare occasion where that happens? Because probably what happened is this is how God got Cyrus to actually do it, was that when he came into power, Daniel or some other Jewish people in Babylon would said to him, Cyrus, look at this prophecy about you that was written 150 years ago. Hugely flattering. And that prompted him to do what God wanted him to do. So it's a very rare thing. So I don't know if you're getting the flow of my argument about, why this can be so rare. And of course, as a result of that, he's got this whole swathe of scholars who are skeptical about it, okay? And essentially saying, couldn't have. Must have been written after the time of Cyrus, okay? So God actually gives more protection to the prophecy by using a very high level of symbolism that has to be worked out. And the symbolism has to be placed alongside what? History. Symbolism alongside history. Does the symbolism fit the history? If it does, you can see the symbolism is true. So number 2, the symbols have to be understood in the kind of context of the Bible, in the context of the Bible. The way the symbolism develops throughout the history of the Bible. Number 2, it has to fit history. So can you see how there's an interplay between those 2 important areas? Symbolism that can be explained biblically, and history that it can be placed alongside to see if this is so. That's the tremendous power in symbolic prophecy. That's the tremendous power of it. So really put that in alongside there. And the big thing about the history is that when it comes to Daniel, timeline is vital to understanding Daniel. And timeline is vital because what is he saying essentially? That in the space of these 4 kingdoms, in other words, in the 4th kingdom, God is going to establish a kingdom that will never end. Never end. He's going to establish a kingdom. In other words, the Messiah is going to come because the kingdom has to do with the Messiah. The Messiah is going to come, the kingdom is going to be established that will never end. So the timeline, the historical timeline, is vital. It has to happen within the Roman kingdom. It can't happen after the Roman kingdom. Okay, but somehow the Roman kingdom, having died, is going to be reconstituted, in the 21st century. Okay. And Jesus is going to come back and establish a kingdom in Jerusalem. No, it doesn't make sense like that. And that's why the timeline is vital. And so the timeline has to fit history. And so therefore you've got to do something that you've got to get out of your comfort zone. Most people here have to get out of their comfort zone and actually look at history. Because most of you like history. Did history at school? I hate history. How many people feel that in this room? Probably quite a few mentioned. Okay, I'm an outlier in that. I just loved history. I always just loved history. I read history for recreation. So it's like something wrong with me. Something happened. Maybe I was dropping in my head when I was young. So, but this is the whole idea. You've got to sort of spend that dislike of history to say, okay, let's get with this. Okay, let's get with this, and put this symbolism that we can understand biblically alongside history. So you're doing that. You're investing yourself in that process in order to get the fulfillment of the prophecy and recognize it for what it is, which can hugely boost your faith. Okay, so we're undertaking this journey in this class from this point. Okay, to some extent, we already started in chapter 2, okay, and very pictorial, which is great. And this is also very pictorial, which is also great. So it's like painting a picture. So it's not just facts and numbers. It's a picture's being painted. That picture can match the history and the timeline, which is vital. Okay? So I've really emphasized that massively. And so I just want to go back to Genesis just to bring out an idea, and this is where you start engaging with me on this. So let's go to Genesis chapter 2 and read verse 22 and 23. Genesis chapter 2, verse 22 and 23. And what we have here, let's start in verse 21. The Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in that place. The Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she is taken out of man. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Okay? So if you had to take a symbolism out of that, because you've got a symbol there. What is the symbol there? The rib, yeah. The rib is the symbol. And what is it's symbolic of there in that text? What is it symbolic of? God takes the rib, fashions a woman out of it, and man said she should be called woman because she is taken from my bone and my flesh. So it's not just the bone, it was the flesh as well that was taken. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And therefore she should be called woman. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. What is the rib symbolic of? Oneness. Okay. Oneness. Okay. The whole idea of oneness and partnership, because that's the other idea that comes out in Genesis with regard to man and woman, is that idea of man and woman partnering. Okay? But the essential idea of the rib is the idea of oneness. Two becoming one in this place. Two becoming one. Okay? One becomes two. Then from that time on, two become one. Right? So the rib becomes symbolic of that partnership, of that oneness. All right, so let's go back to Daniel chapter 7. And we look at, of course, you've got this highly pictorial thing. And you can visualize it as you're looking at it. And in verse 5, which we dealt with, we see, behold another beast, the second one, resembling a bear. And the bears were prolific in the area of Persia, huge bears. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth, between its teeth. Okay, so we talked a little bit last week about those 3 ribs. Now, symbolically, what is that indicating? That this beast, this bear, it's got 3 partners. become one with this bear. Right? It's in its mouth, which you could say, okay, it's about to be consumed and become one with. This bear is made up of three. Okay? So, what it essentially means is he has a kingdom that actually has three partners. That the three become one. And there's basically two options, and one of them I mentioned last time was the fact that you had the Medes and the Persians, and then they actually conquered Lydia, which was quite a big kingdom, and was ruled by King Croesus. And from about the 16th century, there's an English saying, which is not really used much today, but you might have heard it, as rich as Croesus. Okay? But that's probably very much a British English thing, in South Africa. I've never used that in my life, that saying. I'm not familiar with it, but I've never used it. But, this from about the 16th century, this idea was passed around that he was hugely rich. And it was a fairly wealthy kingdom. And I mentioned that last week. It might be talking about the three partners, might be the kingdom of Lydia, where King Croesus had ruled, and Media and Persia. That the three that basically partner and become one. Or it could be the second option. Okay? It could be Media, Persia, and Babylonia. Because Babylon, they didn't destroy the city of Babylon when they took it over. They didn't destroy it. It actually became the administrative capital. I think this is the most likely idea. So you've got the Medes, the Persians, and the Babylonians. And Babylon actually became the administrative capital. So you've got essentially three partners in this kingdom. That's another option. The other one is the Medes, the Persians, and the Elamites. Elam was part of a big part of Persia as an actual kingdom. But the whole of Persia, including Elam, became part of this kingdom. So Medes, Persians, Elam. Elam is really part of Persia. Okay? So that's perhaps the most logical one, because it's not, but when I say logical, let me backtrack on that. It's not necessarily logical, because essentially, in order for the Medes to unite with the Persians had to conquer the Medes, and then they became one. So either Medes, Persians, Babylon, or Medes, Persians, Elamites. Okay. It's just too complex. Too complex. It's too complex. All right. All you have to read, you'll never remember those three, right? But I've mentioned them, and all you've got to recognize is that this Medo-Persian Empire, which ruled for 200 years, had basically three partners. Why do I think maybe it's the Medes, Persians, and the Babylonians? It's because Babylon became the administrative capital, and it talks in Daniel chapter 6 about the satraps being appointed. Is it in chapter 6, verse 1. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom so that they'd be in charge of the whole kingdom. Very successful way of administration that Cyrus actually put into place, where he put satraps in different regions, and they served as I mentioned before, as kind of vassal kings. Okay? And it helped this whole empire to just be intact and to collect taxes. Very successful system that was put into effect by Cyrus over his whole empire. And so the administrative capital for that was Babylon. So you could look at it all and say, yeah, you've got those three. Okay? And so the three ribs in the mouth of the bear. I've given you a lot of information about that. And I've tried to really make it clear. I'm not going to give you so much information about all the different symbolism, but just to try and get some idea of how symbolism works, So you can say, okay, does it make sense? Does it? Really? Does it make sense? Stella? Sense? There we are. Okay. My biggest goal is to make sense. You know? So, it's like, he doesn't make any sense up there. I'm always trying to make sense. Right? So sometimes, hopefully, I succeed. If I don't, if I don't make sense, if I don't succeed in getting the idea across, I always go back and try and think of different ways of doing it. And if I'm having a discussion with somebody, I'll put something in 3 different ways, and sometimes they say to me, I get it, just, all right, I get it, just enough already. This is just overkill. So I know I'm guilty of overkill, and I'm probably guilty of overkill in this particular case. Okay, but that we went through all of that last week. Right? That's what the kingdom is like. But I just wanted to really bring out that idea in that whole context. So you've got these 4 kingdoms, and then you've got, in the time of the 4th one, with this terrible, terrifying beast that is the Roman Empire, you're contemplating horns, and behold, another horn, a little one, came up above them. And the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, a horn that possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay? So this is in the 4th kingdom, and you can see from the verses that follow it that in this period, okay, the kingdom is established. Timeline. Okay? So if you talk about 10 kings or 10 emperors of Rome, the first 10, you've got Mark Antony sort of thrown in there as one. He didn't last too long. Essentially what you've got is the emperors that, the rulers that starts with Julius Caesar as a dictator. He's the first dictator. And then they call him emperors from his successor, which is Augustus, which the Bible mentions. He's ruling by the time Jesus comes. Right up through the 1st century, till 69 AD, when that horrible Nero, who murdered a lot of our brethren, commits suicide because he's got no escape. And his Praetorian Guard has deserted him. So he basically puts a knife into his throat to kill himself. And then you've got 3 emperors in succession in 69. 3 emperors in succession. All of them get killed. And they're replaced by Vespasian, who then, starts the Flavian dynasty, which only lasts for 3 emperors. Himself, his son Titus. Anybody remember who Titus, apart from Brother Talbot? Anybody know who Titus is famous for? What Titus is famous for? Anyone? For putting Jerusalem under siege and destroying Jerusalem. That's what he's famous for. Okay? And in the hometown of Vespasian, there's this wonderful painting on the ceiling of this structure that shows Vespasian entering Rome, and you can see in that picture, today, you can see the candlesticks, the candlesticks in the temple, part of the temple. You can see that there. He's got the wealth of Judea, and he's bringing it into Rome, and he helps, that wealth helps to reconstruct Rome and revitalize and rebuild the aqueducts that fed Rome with water, and build the Colosseum. And also build the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus and the Colosseum. Yeah. I think the Arch of Titus is still there, I think. Not too sure. But the Colosseum is still there in Rome. You can go there today. What was that built with? Money from the destruction of Jerusalem. Wow, can you believe it? Okay. But that helped Vespasian to really establish himself. 3 emperors dead in 1 year. He was involved in the death of at least one of them, maybe, or 3. Okay? He's the little horn. Okay? A little horn. Why is he a little one? Because you've had essentially 10 horns who were all successors of Julius Caesar, and then the dynasty combines with Claudius. They're all of noble birth. But but Vespasian isn't. His mother was kind of poor gentry. His father was very much a peasant, well, educated. He was a tax collector, then he went into money lending, made a lot of money, and so that gave Vespasian a chance to climb the ladder in society. But in order to do that, he also had to couldn't do what the very wealthy did, and that is avoid the army. He had to go into the army, Vespasian. Okay? But even his description as a little horn, he was actually short, thick-set, and pretty ugly. And his actual face is what, you ever heard of Punch and Judy? English Punch and Judy? Anybody? Punch and Judy? It's two puppets, Punch and Judy. And Punch, man and female, Punch has got a hook nose and a jaw that sticks out like that. Okay, you can look it up on your cell phones. That's based on Vespasian, the hook nose, jaw sticking out. Yeah, pretty ugly guy. Short, ugly, thick-set, not really a great thinker or anything like that, but very steady, very determined. And he takes over the power in Rome in 69 AD and rules until 79. He rules for 10 years. He's the little horn. He's little because his background, maybe because of his size as well. Because he's a short guy. Basically peasant background. Who would have thought he'd be emperor? Nobody would have thought. He didn't even think he'd be emperor. But he ends up being emperor. And he brings all the wealth of Judea with him. So he's very much connected, right, with persecution of people who were God's people, right? The destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple. That with these 10, he comes after and he's number 11. He's the little horn. Wow. Okay. So you already had Rome identified. And then you already had 10 rulers, 10 horns rule. Okay. And then you have the 11th, which is Vespasian, who's the little horn that makes big boasts. Okay. Even though he's of this very humble background, he really is out there. Okay, so how does that sound? Makes some sense, eh? There is some logic to this somewhere. Right. There's some depth because you can actually contemplate it and say, okay, it fits. Yeah? It actually fits. Any comments, thoughts so far? Take a deep breath.
Yeah, maybe just to take a breath. Is there any reason why you spoke about timelines? Is there any reason why events happen at a specific time, not the other time? Like, for example, the kingdom coming at the time of the fourth kingdom.
Yeah.
Not at any other time.
Yes. Well, you see, that's the importance of the four kingdoms. Is it's actually saying, what does it say? And you basically get it primarily from verse 13 onwards. And this is only the first time it's mentioned here. It'll be mentioned again, but it's also mentioned, in previously as well. All right. Have a look at verses 9 and 10. Let's read verse 9 and 10. Shall I read it? Somebody want to read it? A booming voice, a loud voice. It doesn't have to boom, it can just be loud. Fine. I'll read it. I kept looking. You're going to read it. Start again.
As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was filled with flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened.
Okay, so let's also read Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4.
Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years.
All right. Notice how he's described. And obviously, who's he talking about? Christ. He actually mentions who he's talking about. He's talking about Christ in the last verse. Reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given them. I saw souls. Okay. So, who is this person? It's Christ. Okay? So, this is applied to Christ in Revelation chapter 20. And Jesus, by the way, this is the description he uses for himself. This is the moniker he uses for himself, Son of Man. The Son of Man. And why is it someone like the Son of Man? Why does it say that? I saw, I've jumped ahead. Haven't I? I have. In my head I've jumped ahead. So let me just, can I reel that in? I reel it in. Okay. We'll get to Son of Man. It doesn't mention Son of Man here, it mentions it from verse 13. Okay, so here it's talking about what kind of scene do you think is being depicted here? A scene of, when it talks about throne, what is that talking about? Rule. Okay. That's an easy symbol, eh? Easy symbol to understand. When you talk about a throne, you're talking about rule. So it's talking about rule, and what kind of rule is being described here, Brother Merriby, do you think? Rule of God, right? Does it make sense that this is talking about God's rule? No? Does it make sense to you? Yeah. Okay. If you look at it, this is talking about, about thousands and myriads and myriads. Myriads. Here we got the word myriads again. Okay, myriads and myriads. And the books were opened. This is a description of God's throne. And there's two thrones, maybe God and Christ sitting on the throne, right? Jesus sitting on that seat. When he ascends, he's seated at the right hand of God. Okay. Let's read verse 11 and 12.
I looked then because of the sound of the great waves that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and his body destroyed, and given over to be men with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged to a season and a time.
Okay, so the whole idea is it talks about the fact that this horn with its boasting, and the beast which it represents, in other words, the Roman Empire. What is he going to say? That Roman Empire is going to be destroyed. In fact, it ended with the barbarian invasion in the 4th century. And it was almost like the end of the Roman Empire was more like a whimper than a great finale. It was just ended. It was already falling apart long before it ended. So the other kingdoms, when they were absorbed by the ones before them, had life still. Babylon, as a city, continued to exist until around about 964. So 536 is when it's conquered, but it's not destroyed. 164, so they kind of get absorbed, and they exist even with the Greeks. The Greeks didn't destroy Persia. They basically did the same kind of thing. They let the local people have some autonomy. The Romans basically took over from all of that and ruled with an iron rod. But Rome gets destroyed. And it's like they're the most vicious, and God's just going to just end them as an empire. And then we get the Son of Man being presented, verses 13 and 14.
I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His kingdom is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed.
Okay, let's also look at Matthew 24, verse 30.
Let's take this look.
24, verse 30.
Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
Okay, so you get Jesus talking about his coming back on clouds, and he refers to himself as Son of Man. Okay, he refers to himself as Son of Man. And also, I haven't marked that one down, but it would be in Matthew chapter 26, I think, with the trial. Matthew 26, verse 64. 26:64.
Jesus said to them, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on we will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven."
Okay, so with God, and of course it's accused of blasphemy there. The idea of coming on clouds or going on clouds, and even when he ascends in Acts chapter 1, what does he do? He ascends into the clouds. So that's symbolic of deity coming or going. The clouds are symbolic of deity coming and going. Can you see how you can pick up the symbolism? Okay? So if you look at Acts chapter 1, with regard to the ascension, and verse 9, Acts chapter 1, verse 9.
And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight.
All right, and verse 11 says he's going to come back in the same way. So the idea of coming or going in the clouds is, I think, that's the presence of deity, coming on clouds or going on clouds. So it's symbolic of deity. So what do we have here? You look in the night, there were visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days. Now, why does he say one? That was a question I had earlier, prematurely. Why does he say one like the Son of Man? Why does he say it? Why didn't he just say the Son of Man? Why does he say one like the Son of Man, do you think?
I think it was an attempt at distinguishing Jesus from angels.
From?
From angels.
Yeah.
It says that he came like a man. So it was being referred to like a human being is not.
You're on the right track, but I think it's deeper than that. It's because he's more, you're right, that's good. Because what he's saying is not just the Son of Man, he's also deity. So he's like the Son of Man because he's more than just this being that was in the human form of Jesus. It's actually deity. Right? So he's one like the Son of Man. That he appears, what human beings would look and say, oh, that's Jesus. Yeah, he looks like him, doesn't he? But he's more than that. He is actually revealed who he was always on earth, in actual fact. But he is deity himself. He is God himself. So, remarkable. And he comes up to the Ancient of Days. So who's the Ancient of Days? The Father. So if he comes with clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days, what is this talking about? What event is this talking about? We've just mentioned it. Acts chapter 1. The ascension. Goes up into the clouds, and he goes before the Ancient of Days. And he's like the Son of Man. It's the ascension of Jesus into heaven. It's talking about the ascension of Jesus into heaven. You can see that, right? And was presented before him. It's the ascension of Jesus to the Father's throne, to be our mediator, our King. He's the one who has all authority. And it says, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. What does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 28, verse 18? All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. So Jesus ascends to the Father, and what has been given to him? Glory, dominion, glory, and a kingdom. It's hugely descriptive of the reality that we see in the New Testament, isn't it? And this is written during the Babylonian captivity. This was written more than 536 BC. Okay? In the time of Belshazzar, this is the last one, so it's close to 536 BC. And it's describing the ascension of Jesus and his kingdom, that he's been given this kingdom which is all powerful. And who has part of this kingdom? All the peoples and nations and men of every language might serve him. This dominion is an everlasting kingdom. This is the kingdom that can't be destroyed. Why? Because it's a spiritual kingdom, which will not pass away. Why? Because it's not physical, it's spiritual. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. It's the same kind of idea that's mentioned in Matthew chapter 16, right? Where Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades representing the realm of the dead, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And he goes on to say, now I will give you the keys of the kingdom, linking the church with the kingdom, the church and the kingdom. It's the same idea. The keys of the kingdom, which of course is the gospel. The key is what opens the door to the kingdom. That's more symbolism, right? You can understand that quite easily, eh? Brother Marabini? The key opens the door to the kingdom. Huh? So, isn't that marvelous? That symbolism can be understood, right? There is a background, there is an idea behind it that can be understood. It's marvelous.
Yeah. Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
I just want to, because I haven't read that 13 and 14 as to when Jesus was given the authority. Did it take long after he ascended before the authority was given to him, or was it immediately?
Essentially got it with the resurrection. If you had to put a point in time, because when he appears to his disciples, he's resurrected, and he says all authority has been given to him. How's this authority invested in him? Through his resurrection. It's the same with us. When do we get forgiveness of sins? When we are resurrected. When are we resurrected? When we rise out of the water. Romans 6, 3 and 4. So when does Jesus receive this authority? When he's resurrected. Okay? So when he ascends to the Father, to assume his role as king, he already has that authority. Now he's done it. The work, his work has done. He's accomplished it. And he's there ruling with the Father. And he has his kingdom, which will never end. The kingdom was established with the resurrection of Christ, which occurred in this fourth kingdom, the Roman kingdom, in the 1st century AD. Okay. Which is why we see and recognize that, why we know the timeline is so important. It's marvelous when you think about it, that God actually gives you all the details about when this kingdom is going to be established more than 500 years before it actually happens. And he gives you the timeline. And it happened there. And here's the description of it. Anybody still thinks the kingdom is still coming, here's the description of the fact that he now has the kingdom. And who's part of it? People of nations and men of every language. They serve him. Where? Where do they serve him? Of course, in his kingdom, right? Where do you serve a king? You serve a king in his kingdom. So it's all laid out there. It's beautifully laid out. In this fourth kingdom, this beast, the Messiah is going to come. And his kingdom is going to be established. And he's going to go to the Father because he's more than just the Son of Man. He's like the Son of Man. He is the Messiah, God incarnate, who after being resurrected ascends to the Father. It's all laid out there in such beautiful descriptive language. Okay, so contemplate it over this next week and enjoy your contemplation. If you really think about it, the more you read it, the more you think. The more I read it, every time I read it, it's like it boosts me all over again. For the American, it just keeps boosting me. I just, like, wow. All right. Brother, only could you close us in prayer? Anybody we need to remember? Brother Justice, he's not well. Anybody else? Okay, let's pray.